Hello and welcome to this presentation on advanced data modeling. Hopefully you'll find it very insightful as I'm going to explain this concept in a way you've never heard of before. And data modeling is a concept that exists in a lot of systems. It's in SQL Server Management Studio, SQL Server Analysis Services, Power BI, Tableau, even Excel, just to name a few. And it's really a concept which I think people understand to varying degrees, but it can be implemented in lots of different systems. And the reason for this post is, as well as helping with the Power BI exam, I've seen a lot of posts over my years, especially using LinkedIn, with regards to Power BI, SQL, and Excel. A lot of people, who are very senior like it, have a lot of followers, they reshare it. Profile looks strong, but I don't always think it's correct or worth a lot of value, or at least as much how it's made out to be. And I think you can find the same information online word for word or better. So for me, something truly advanced would be everything I know has gone up as a result of this one post or this with one video. It's left an impression. You don't forget about it, and it's revolutionary in the scheme of things. It's not repeating, it's innovative, it's pioneering. For me, I would count that as advanced. And I think a number of fallacies and data exist to support why the advanced isn't there. It can be researched. They can tell by the profile they don't have 10 years experience actually leading stuff in the organization. It's normally what they find online. They're repeating it in a slightly different way, which means you can find the same word for word online, or sometimes even better, or then sometimes maybe not as good. But the lack of hands-on experience to say I developed X, Y, Z products wouldn't be there. So it's never really useful to the point if you've got 10 years experience, you're looking at it, you can say, I'm learning something new. It's correct, but not high value, and therefore I wouldn't define it as advanced. And sometimes people can be misdirected by job title experience. So ultimately, a lot of things are luck to someone who's got a very nice job title. And if the genius was there in the same interview, they might not have got that job, but you don't know that. You don't know how many applications they've done to get a job. The person who beat them in the first interview to get a senior analyst, that other person might have had to do 200 more, 20 more interviews to get the same title. And I think the other thing is you don't really know how much it pays. So you could have a senior data analyst or an MI manager or a CEO, which is sometimes a self-given title, and they could be getting paid 35, 45, 75, if not more as a contractor. And sometimes there's family circumstances, so there could be someone who's got loads of ability, but their priority is staying where they know they're safe and not moving up. So the interviews to get the role or the job title, it depends on the person interviewing you, and sometimes they make mistakes. They're not always hiring the cleverest person. So it can be a bit of a fallacy using someone's title to say, this person's an expert, because in reality there's a lot of luck involved. And the other reason why I think it's hard to have advanced is because it's very easy to be misdirected by the masses. So if I saw two accounts, one had 80,000 followers, the other one had 10,000 followers, most people would assume that the 80,000, if you were to take all those followers, they might have more experience, then they might have more income, and between them, they might have a higher average wage for buying power and more influence within the company. But the reality is, if the 80,000 has 79,000 job seekers and the 10,000 just has working professionals only, the 10,000 actually has more influence compared to the other. And the other side of this means that if you have a post with 1,000 comments and it's data related, if 950 of those are job seekers or entry level roles, 49 mid level, and one's like a master level and they have more hands on and experience, that one that's very advanced and correct is actually worth more. But obviously, it's hard for the other to notice with all of the factors I've discussed. So sometimes you've got to be careful with the masses because the am in masses is silent. And lastly, a key differentiator is if it's a hobby versus if it's a job. And this has two parts to it. So if you can get paid for doing something, you wouldn't want to do it for free, is basically the summary. So for some people, if they can get reshares and other opinions, but it doesn't lead to a direct monetary gain, they simply won't interact because it's worth nothing to them. Wherever it's a hobby, then it's fine. And I think, for me, I always view data as commercial analytics. So if there's something that has £0 profit to be made, or I'm not sure how useful it is, let's say like interacting and sharing ideas. And then I've got something else, and I've got Towers 3, which might be learning a complex piece of machine learning that I can use to improve decision making. For me, the first is the skilling, where the second is always improving myself, and I think it will come in handy later. So for me, it's like I don't treat it as a hobby. I treat it as a professional job. So I do things for work purposes, not for fun, because I'm used to be getting paid for using different skills. Just to give you a bit of a background to myself, and this is only important because it gives context with regards to the ideas I generate, how my skill set is built up via most, and ultimately how this leads to the data modeling area we're going to cover. So my career in data starts 2 or 3 years from graduating. I jumped from a band 2 in some medical laboratories to a band 4 doing some ICT training to a band 6 analytics trainer, which was a 7, but they'd removed the technical building element of the role. And in this role, I was leading analytics nationally on site with paying customers, helping to inform decision-making processes rather nationally. And I could do all of my analysis within the tool. So I scoped, developed what the training should cover, and I decided to do this in a way I very much need to understand things myself to be able to explain it better than others could, and also to link it to other concepts in ways people before me hadn't thought about. And this is in order to show business value, because in my mind, if I can show business value, I'll get uptake of the tool when it otherwise wouldn't be there. So I'm very much pioneering or leading these ideas, and my sessions used to have 3 parts to it. It's this is how it works. What's your business problem? What do you want to know? And here is the answer. So if they could ask the right question, they could all most times I could always give them the answer that they needed, but it was always tailored. I never used a repeatable agenda. So it was just a question of how clever you are, basically. And I've got 2 teams I work with. On the management side, there's one, and I know Prince 2 practitioner is highly in demand and sought after. And then on the other side, there's a development team. And I know SQL is quite a big thing and also quite hard. So I'd already taken down the Prince 2 practitioner in my own time. It took me a few months, went through 500 pages, page by page, and that opens up the band 7 with the current experience if I want to move up quite quickly, because Prince 2 is highly sought after. And at the time, I thought, look, my analytics management skills are quite strong. Maybe it's better to focus on the development stuff as it's a bit of a blind spot. So I very much just put the effort into the harder tasks. And the way I learned SQL was using paid resources via an online course with a curriculum to pass an exam. But as well as that, I was actually testing my own variations of the code compared to what was being taught to understand the underlying behavior better than how it was being taught. And a lot of people don't do that. They focus on the work task, they work it out and they get it done. And once they know something they didn't know, they're comfortable. Where I'm not aiming to write it right first time, I'm not aiming to pass an exam, I'm not aiming to do it for work. It's actually, I want to see the bigger picture and I want to have some level of professionalism so I can say, this is how you do this. I can write it for you right first time, but did you also know X, Y, Z? And I think it's only then you can say you're advanced. So I never rest on my laurels where most would. And I think this is the difference between self-taught and not. The presenter for the video had 30 years experience. He was from the USA and I thought he was very good personally. And he underpinned my knowledge. So if I say X, Y, Z, and you're self-taught for 2 or 5 years, even if I have 6 months experience, don't underestimate me because what I'm saying might be what he said. So if you have a problem or you think it's wrong and you're picking a fight, you're not picking a fight with me, you're picking a fight with him because he's the reference and he might have said, look, the people who have less experience are going to say this, but they're wrong. This is the right answer because I've ran into it multiple times myself in my career. So in effect, he's saying, stick up for yourself because this has happened multiple times and I know what I'm talking about and you can trust me. And for me personally, there's always room for improvement if you want to be in that room and you're eager to learn and improve and challenge yourself with new ideas to be better. Or put another way, if you don't look, you won't find. But my understanding is in part due to this path I took, and it started with accreditation. And if you're missing this, you're more likely to have a weaker foundational knowledge than those who have it due to covering a wider curriculum, which you wouldn't be exposed to in your day-to-day role, but that doesn't make you better or not as good as a job than someone who has it or doesn't have it. It just means you have a broader knowledge base because you covered a larger area in order to pass the exam using curriculum. And this is a common reason why a lot of skilled people can fail an exam despite having years of experience, being a brilliant business problem solver, and someone who has less knowledge might pass the exam. The exam is not there to test your skills building or how you implement data to show value. It is there to test your knowledge of passing what is set out in the content of the exam, and therefore for me it's not a reflection of skill level. And there are loads of areas that are covered as part of the curriculum that most wouldn't unless you happen to be specifically looking for it. And because the area is just so big. And one that really hit home that will be useful to explain for this presentation is that there are data types and also the concept of normalization. And I'm not going to include graphs or images for this, but just say it verbally because I'm focusing on data modeling and the Power BI exam, not databases and SQL with regards to data type, but the principle is important for what's coming up. And it matters because you have columns and you have rows, and then you have values within them. And if you want, you can think of the values inside of them like a cell in Excel, and it takes up space. And the way I imagine it in my mind when I was learning it is with plant vases in a warehouse that you want to move from location A to location B. And you might have a trolley and you might have boxes, and 1 and 4 medium boxes make up one large box. So on my trolley, I can put 12 big boxes, each with one vase, and they're nicely supported and bring A to B. And that will be better than holding one really heavy, wide vase from A to B and carrying it in my hands. So that's how I'm seeing it in my mind. Or I could use the medium boxes because they still fit, and 4 medium boxes make up one large. So that's equivalent to moving 48 in one go instead of 12. And the presenter, he didn't say this obviously, he was just talking about data types. But that's exactly what you're doing in SQL when you define the data types and then you're querying it. You're asking the data to move from one location to the other. So let's say, as an example, we have a calculated column that we call age, and we know this is going to be a whole number. A lot of people will define the data type as an int data type, which belongs to an integer family, and it takes up 4 bytes of data per cell. And you can store a value of plus or minus 2 million. Now, the oldest person who's ever lived is 122 years old, so there's no need for me to go that big. I can use a tiny int data type instead, and that only uses 1 byte of storage, and the range is from that I can store with 0 to 255, and that'll do. And depending on how much data there is, that one change can lead to a huge performance gain when you're iterating over hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of rows with regards to customer data. And that's the whole concept of the boxes moving. And this is where if you're just trying to do the job allocated to you, or you're learning as you go, or you're studying just for the sake of qualification, I don't think you'll make these links. And making these links, I think, is what opens up the advanced. And what's important to understand from this, if I'm relating it back to industry, is I have a friend who works in a bank in London. He's on well over 6 digits, first class degree from University of Birmingham computer science, where I studied biological science and I didn't score that high. And a few months after passing my exam, we were walking around university catching up as it'd been a few years, and I told him I was studying SQL. And the conversation went in such a way, he asked me one of the questions that he got asked in his interview that really impressed the interviewers, and it was to do with indexes. And I also knew about it, and I gave him a 10-minute answer, way better than what he said. And he said, "How the hell did you know all of that?" And I was like, "Well, I taught myself." And the unfortunate reality is that a lot of people and even managers, they won't count an MTA for anything because it's classed as foundational knowledge. They want higher. People who have a bit of knowledge are going to skip right over the MTA. Where for me, I wanted to build a solid foundation to build on top of it. And as I said, in this case, he was miles behind. He studied computer science. I spent 4 months self-teaching myself databases and SQL, and I don't know what else he got asked, but his strongest answer was miles behind mine, as I said. But if the topic had been normalization, it wouldn't have mattered because I knew everything at that level where I covered it. So if you're studying properly and you think of your own variations and what you're learning, you adapt it, it counts in a big way. If it's not, you're just after a qualification isolation, then it doesn't really count because you can pass an exam and then you can forget everything the day after or never use any of it again. And I probably shouldn't say this, but there's a few times I've attended Power BI meetup groups and very senior people, very big companies, lots of followers. And I always seem to know more without having prepared the content. And I'm always thinking, well, what's going on? And it's really just a case of, as I mentioned at the start, they've researched an area most don't know about and they're presenting it back and they're getting their confidence from that. Where I've never attended Power BI meetup groups before, and I thought I was fairly clever. And then when I can see someone who's like a self-claimed CEO or has got really a senior position in a well-known consultancy company or multinational company, recognized name, then I get a lot of confidence from it. So I thought I was cleverer before, but now I think I'm even cleverer because I know more without having prepared the content just by turning up on the day. So I never underestimate or overestimate anyone, and it's because of that I think my skill sets are higher than most. I never feel comfortable. I always want to know, okay, what's the hardest technical build? What's the hardest specification? And then I'll measure myself against someone else. And then once I've done it once, I won't do it again because I know what the result is. And as mentioned previously, after leaving that role, I decided I wanted to become a developer instead because it complemented my pre-existing strengths. And I always wanted to know how will I know if I'm a competent developer? Where's my benchmark? So as well as creating the most technically difficult tasks I could imagine in different roles, I also tackled the hardest technical qualifications that was out there. And I'm going to exclude what I've done in work time for now, bar where it overlaps mainly to the data modeling. But in this first technical role, which I got on a weaker skill set, hiding my stronger one against 5 or 6 others, I had already covered the paid Tableau desktop exam, scoring 88%, and I prepared for the Tableau Associate, which was one up. And I had done quite a lot of work in work time creating training material, over 340 items of code, developed a few complex products for stakeholders that were live in Tableau, but I didn't want to put all the eggs in one basket, so I decided to cover Microsoft as well. And I got the MCSA, Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate certificate in BI reporting, which is now retired. And more formally, I covered data modeling in Power BI and Excel. But in the exam, there wasn't anything revolutionary I took away with regards to data modeling in either. Despite scoring 91% in the Excel exam and 84.5 in the Power BI exam, the Excel skills they went up, fairly. But my Power BI knowledge, which obviously previously was very low, soared, and Power BI impressed me compared to Tableau to the point I decided from now on, the next role onwards, I'm only using Power BI. Because we are discussing Power BI, I think it's important to know the context of how this Power BI Tableau comparison relates to industry, when it might come up, and how I got the knowledge. So for me, well, for a fact, it's better with regards to cost. It's much cheaper, and even in the amount of time it takes to build in Power BI versus Tableau, the ETL functionality, it impressed me not just compared to Tableau, not just Excel, but even SQL for automating tasks because I know how many steps it would take. And since then, I've also know a fair amount about SSIS and SSAS, and there are use cases where I still use Power BI, to be honest with you. And the data science functionality impressed me as well. And at the time, I created a document with 40 differences between the two, with everything quantified, as well as the savings for a business case. And this is something since then and before now, it's only come up once. I mentioned it once in their £500 a day 6 month interview in the About Me, again, later in my career, and they were really impressed rather by the comparison points, but I didn't get the job. And if they had implemented what I said, I wouldn't know, but they would have saved a small fortune. So, I personally don't post on it, and I wouldn't want to because I know how hard it is to get that knowledge. It was studying side by side. But back to the point, at this stage, data modeling still wasn't a wow moment for me. It's also worth noting that as well as impressing one side of contractors, I've also lost a £450 interview per day for 6 months. And I done the build for them in Tableau. They were really happy. I used advanced parameters. I flew through the SQL questions, data type, CTE, window functions, stored procedures. But I told them I was better in Power BI than Tableau, and I asked if I could use that instead. And they needed two Tableau developers, and you can imagine how that went down. But I don't mind because in the long run, it would have been worse even if I'd taken the contract using Tableau compared to where I am now, because it would have weakened the skill set overall. And at the time, Microsoft's highest qualification was a Microsoft Certified Solution Expert in Data Management Analytics. And it builds on from the certificate I showed you previously, and I only had one chance to pass it before I got retired. And I wanted to cover the data warehouse route, but I didn't really have the time. And I knew my database skills were quite strong from the MTA period. So I went down this route because I still had the notes and I knew I could do it, but I still have a few grey hairs from attempting this exam. And the reason why this qualification is so highly coveted and sought after and actually globally recognized is because of the breadth of knowledge you had to have, and if it wasn't for that SQL, how I studied it, the notes, I don't think I could have passed it in the time I had till it expired. And in this exam, I scored a 78.5 on this particular one, similar to the 78% in the MT database fundamentals. You only need 70% or 700, I'm rounding it, but it was crazy advanced agenda-wise. What sticks to my mind even now is the performance tuning methods, some of the ways you can break up the stored procedures, new functionality from 2017 onwards that doesn't exist in previous versions, which I'm not going to cover, and the concept of OLTP and OLAP, which does cover data modeling, and I am going to cover. And in the role I was at the time, we had a BI developer that we wanted to work on a data warehouse. So I was aware of a data warehouse for that reason as well. Now, this is so advanced. In 30 or 40 data interviews, for me personally, I've only ever got asked it once with that specific wording, and it was around the 70k mark. If you're under the 70k mark, I don't think you're likely to get asked in those words unless they've watched this video and I've given them the idea is that advanced. And a lot probably, wouldn't know about it anyway because there's so many things that can pop up and only know about it because of this route. And it's only in the role after where I was using Power BI full time. I was doing some data modeling. There was a lot of back end stuff going on in ETL in the role that this final exam started to fit in and I could see the big picture. And again, I'm sure you're probably not surprised at this stage, but I do have my own documents for the differences between OLTP and OLAP. And with our AP, it does go into cubes, which again, I'm not going to go into, but it's really where it started to hit home. And I'm sure you're curious, what happened with the interview? How did I get there? What came up? And in the interview, there was stuff like columns for indexes as well. And I was quite worried because I thought the person interviewing me was a senior data scientist and he was asking really hard questions. I knew the answers to most of it, but I thought maybe it was a bit too clever for me. Like, if I get this job, is everything going to be cutting edge that I'm working on? So I backed down in interview because I didn't really want to be, doing something that I felt was too advanced for me. And there's probably other jobs where the wage shouldn't be too different, where it's a lot easier. But I don't really want to be, top 1% cutting edge. But it turns out the person interviewing me didn't have any technical skills. He was more so a salesperson, a management skill set. So if I'd kept it cool, kept my bottle, acted confident, I probably would have done quite well. But it's really in the 70k region where stuff like this comes up. Mostly consultancy type who can afford it. They won't ask you about a star schema, but they will into performance side because that's harder to have knowledge. The ideal answer, you'd have about 6 points mentioning different tools if you really wanted to knock it out of the park. but you wouldn't get any major points for the data types, which I mentioned if you missed out the 4 easy ones, never mind the 2 harder ones. And they pay you higher on the market because you're going to make them a fortune. And I'm a bit funny in that I don't tend to go out my way for those type of roles, as I've helped one company out already. So you might be saying, why did you attend it? How did you get it? Well, I made a hacker job profile at the time and they contacted me, not the other way around. So most times if I see a consultancy, I'm like, nah. But when I set up the profile and I got an invite, I thought I might as well attend it. But I didn't attend any after 2 of those, but very few can afford that wage. So let's get back to business where it's more useful to you. If you have a database, that's regarded as an OLTP system. OLTP stands for Online Transaction Processing. And as it says in the name, it's transactional processing of the data, real-time updates, day-to-day running of the business, and it's mainly for writing data. The data modeling principle of normalization, writing data is called OLTP, and you really do this to avoid losing data. So if something gets deleted from one table, you don't lose that data forever. Because of how the data is modeled, and that's the most basic way I can explain it without going into the principles of normalization, day-to-day running of the business. When you have a data warehouse structure, it's regarded as OLAP. That stands for Online Analytical Processing. Normally, you have the historic data there, and you're not getting the data straight from a database, and there's more data there. But because it's like a snapshot, you got better performance, and it's mainly for reading data. So this suits when you want to analyze your data, and view aggregates of it and specific cuts. Instead of using OLTP, you use OLAP. You just really want it for your analysis. And your principles of star, snowflake, and galaxy or fact constellation schema for reading the data is what you use it, more useful analyzing data within the business. When I completed the Microsoft Certified Trainer course, I did actually go into the differences between using both approaches, specifically for modeling and Power BI, which I don't think there's need to go into. And that gives you a practical application for how to streamline Power BI building and enable more advanced analysis touching on ML as it compares one approach to another. So I bet when I started this presentation, you never thought you're going to get an actual image of a star, snowflake, and a galaxy. And this image is just to reinforce the concept, but I am going to explain it properly with tables in the next slide. And when I done the Microsoft Certified Trainer examination, I covered this, so I'm going to be a bit lazy and reuse some of the slides I found online, but where I've annotated it and gone into greater detail. And I'm also going to put other slides in that I didn't include in the MCT training because that had stuff like Excel versus Power BI, 15 of the key differences where they overlap, which again is a concept a lot of people struggle with, and that's because they don't understand when or what data analytics is with regards to exporting data into Excel. So that doesn't mean they're not using the dashboards, and fundamentally this concept of analytics isn't there. But this isn't something I'm going to go into. It's on data modeling, but I think it's important to be aware of, this generally. So with the star schema, you can see there is a central area and there's an area outside of that with all the pointy bits, but all of the pointy bits are always coming back to the center. With the snowflake schema, there's a middle bit, but you can see there are bits sticking out of the bits, leading to the pointy bits. It's branching out, and this is what gives you the snowflake effect. A galaxy schema or fact constellation is something completely different, and it's there twice because it's my favorite type. But most people, they stick to the star. They only talk about the star because the other might be too complex to explain or have use cases for it because it's more advanced. But personally, for me, I'll never use the star schema because it's too basic for me. That being said, star schema is pretty much going to be in most interviews, especially where it's fairly high, 40K zone. It's a standard question. 7 or 8 times out of 10, I would expect it to be there, along with a primary authority concept and maybe a key type variation, which I'm not going to cover. But again, to give you context, as I've done for the rest of the presentation earlier, to industry, with the 70k roles, £500 a day contracting. This is earlier than then in my career. In 2021, I actually had an interview for a BI developer role in the 40s with KPMG data analytics team. We were focused on developing solutions, solve problems for privately owned companies or KPMG private enterprises, and that went really well, both stages. But I actually declined it at the end of the second stage with the people who got the BI area rolling at KPMG, as I already had a role at Computershare with HR in an MI developer capacity with a start date in the bag, and I wasn't going to risk that. And I just wanted to see what the level was to work at KPMG. And at the time, on that specific day, with the people who interviewed me, I was very impressed with the level of questions they asked, and they were very impressed with me because in the previous role, I'd automated 17 days worth of reporting to 2 days, whilst increasing the number of text insights by 60% to 201. And I used a variety of methods and tricks. It just wasn't like one thing. And I was telling them some of how I'd done it. But what I'd done isn't really that important. The point is, data modeling came up with both stages, and it will in a lot of places. And I can't remember what I said word for word, but I remember their eyes lighting up when I was talking about the star schema. So if you have a fact table, which is the center table, if you remember the middle bit where the points conversion the star, and then you have dimension tables, and these are actually the pointy bits or the outside of the star, which are connected to the middle bit. And just for the example, in the top left, you can see there's a dim customer. That's actually your dimension table. The dimension table contains a column or a primary key that's constant and unique for each record, for each row. So no two rows will have that same value more than once. And that uniqueness is why it's called a primary key. Whereas the fact table, and hopefully you'll remember, which is the middle table, contains a foreign key, and that same key repeats multiple times. And if you look at this example, you can see that the relationship is based on the customer ID. And using these relationships, you can access data without having one big table, which improves performance. And that's a fairly impressive answer, but it's a standard answer because I can remember where I learnt it from, as I use multiple resources, and it can be more complicated than that as well, as I've alluded to below, but I'm not going to go into it. So a few years have passed since then, and my knowledge with regards to dimension tables have really gone on, and even the way I think about it in terms of data analysis, which I'll go to next as a concept. But before this, with regards to the star schema, there's one more thing I want to mention. And you're either going to really impress someone or confuse them a little bit because I have a more advanced answer that doesn't really exist, similar to my data modeling comment with regards to OLAP and OLTP in Power BI. So there might be a use case where you don't want to fill as a dimension table. A disadvantage would be regarding cascading filters. And this popped up at the time when I was studying MSBI in SSRS video. And what this means is the groupings in the dimension tables that are around the outside, if you select these all and use them as a filter on the front end of Power BI, you can do that. If you select one of the dimension tables as a filter, it'll restrict the data. But if there are multiple filters, the filters won't restrict each other's selection. So, if a product from one filter selected, the date isn't going to automatically select all the customer IDs to just show the corresponding values. And that's what I refer to as cascading filters. And for simplicity, I want to leave out cardinality and I want to leave out relationship types, which is key to Power BI modeling, as well as the DAX code and how it can impact this, and even the more advanced SQL defining values and data types. But for some of you who are on the board, you might occur to you that you can change the filter direction, and the filter direction means how data travels from one table to another. And if you change it to both, so it travels up and down instead of single, so it only goes in one direction, that would create the cascading filter effect. It would work, but there would be a disadvantage. and that's that it would slow down the performance of your model, depending on the number of dimension tables to the original table, if the filter direction is set to both, so it can travel upstream and downstream to the fact table. So really what I'm saying is the performance gain, it's only what you do with the dimension tables. And this is advanced because what I'm about to say now, like everything else in the presentation, it doesn't exist anywhere else. So I'm going to make it a little bit more complicated because with the dimension tables, I have my own use cases. And a lot of times when I'm learning stuff, especially with regards to the star scheme, it says, look, the star schema really improves performance because it isn't doing the join operation. But I don't think anywhere for me truly gets it, even if I look online. There's nothing that's fundamentally advanced to the point where I can think, wow, I know how I'm going to implement this, and it transforms everything, which is how I understand it. So I'm going to explain that. And as well as that, I'm going to give 3 or 4 use cases that are on my own personal one. So it's really going to a whole different level. So with the dimension tables in something like a star schema, what you're actually doing is you're reducing the size of the data model because you're using the data mapping. So let's say we have a fact table, which is the middle one, and it's got loads of different stores data, products data, how many have been sold by different customers and bought by different customers rather, and there's a million rows. So someone might say, look, we actually want to add the store phone number into the report. So you can either add this to the fact table, in which case it will repeat for a million rows, or you can create a dimension table. You take the store IDs, imagine that has a one-to-one relationship with the phone numbers as a separate table, and then you can relate that table back. And in that dimension table, that's where you add the phone numbers. And in that case, the phone number isn't repeating for every row in the fact table. And I've actually included a calculation of how much space that will save you. And better than that, I've actually explained it as Bock has thought of a new analogy that doesn't exist, so you can conceptualize it in your mind. Now, I also personally use dimension tables as a method of correcting values, where I know there's a pattern or what an incorrect value might be and what the right value might be. And for that, what I'm doing is I'm taking the old values which need correcting and leaving it in one column, and then I'm putting the new values which it should be in another column and looking that back into itself. And what this actually does is it heavily automates work for other teams. So some of the teams I work with, they spend days cleaning values. So, for instance, say if there's a duration, you need it decimalized, and sometimes it can be 1 hour, sometimes it can be 3 minutes. And through my dimension tables, I create the logic once and it's automated in effect. I actually take this one step further and I use dimension tables as a way for the end user to input new values where the data hasn't been mapped. And I do that through a series of complicated join types, which I'm not going to go into. But it's very nice because if an update's needed, I don't need to do anything. They can effectively maintain it themselves, and the automated refresh will take care of it. As I come from an analytics background, for me, the data is how can I improve the analysis on the front end? And I like to use it to create new groupings. So in the raw data, for instance, there might be a region column and it's a 3-digit code, so Great Britain is GBR. And if it was me, I would make the dimension table as I explained with the store, and then I could put the actual name or the countries next to the 3-digit codes. And then there might be another grouping such as EMEA or Oceania based on the countries, and I would add it in as well. And then the end user using hierarchies that I've created or drill downs could actually see the aggregated data and then go down to the region level. Or if I wanted to even swap the columns and rows so they can see just a specific cut. And the list really goes on. There is another concept which I think is a bit too advanced, similar to the cascading filters, but it can come up. With the cascading filter example, if you remember, I was saying how with a star schema, going to the dimension tables from the fact, if you have the filter direction set to both to get that cascading filter effect, you might have better performance by keeping the original column in the table, because with the filter direction to both, it can reduce performance. Now, In the Power BI exam, cascading filters is not going to come up because it's a little bit too advanced. The Power BI exam is hard, don't get me wrong, but for me, it's personally not that hard because all you need to do is just know your stuff in Power BI at a level which you can learn it. You don't have to like understand the concept, pioneer it in a new way that anyone has done before you, and challenge the status quo. So for me, a Microsoft exam, it's like give me a week, I'll do it because the deep insight isn't there. What you do need to understand is the principle and why I've explained it. So what you're more likely to get is you'll get a star schema and there'll be a fact table and there'll be the dimension tables and the image will have it as a both, and it might say, all right, how do you improve the performance of the middle model? Won't mention cascading filters, and then you'll say you put the filter direction to single, but that's the principle. I used this and I want to level up. So this other concept is to do with if there was a column that was a date time in your fact table. So what you could do is you could create a dimension table just using this column. And then obviously this will be the column you'd relate back to your fact table. You could create two extra columns, one with just a date portion and then one with just a time portion. And if you use this date and time portion on the front end, instead of using the combined version, you'd actually have much better performance. And this is because if you think about it, there's less unique combinations for Power BI to iterate, and I'm very much trying to keep it basic, but it refers to the cardinality when you're setting up the relationship types. Because there's less to go through, it's improved performance. And you would actually gain this more in a SQL data source where you're connecting to via a direct query storage engine in the back end of Power BI compared to viewers doing it via an Excel file. Because when you import data into Power BI, it uses a variety of compression algorithms such as run length encoding, hash and dictionary encoding at a column level, and it can automate some of this type of thinking. So obviously, it's a lot less records to search through if there's a date and there's a time, and it can see a distinct list and use that as a filter, compared to if there was a date and time and the distinct number is much higher. With something like a snowflake schema, there's still only one fact table in the center, but the dimensions table around the outside, you're extending it further. And this denormalization or breaking down the dimension tables gives even more improved performance. The bottom right hand corner is a nice, easy one to understand this by. Obviously, I didn't create this visual, I just reused a visual I found online for when I was presenting the Microsoft trainer presentation and added my own text. But you'll notice there are IDs, and the reason for this is because it will probably be stored as less space compared to the original value. So let's say we have a country dimension in the bottom right, and imagine there's three other groupings to analyze the data by, and we could either have it as a string data type, or we could have it as an int data type, and the int data type with the number is right next to the string, so there's a one-to-one. In the fact table, if we have that number that takes up a lot less space than the characters, it just makes more sense because it improves the performance. So that's why the ID columns are there. Another thing I forgot to mention in the earlier slide is that when you're using measures, be sure to always put them in the fact table and not the dimensions because it may not travel down. And again, some of this is stuff I've read, but some of it's not. I've just looked at the diagram, and because I have so much knowledge, I can interpret what's going on without any prior knowledge because it just makes sense to me. And now we get on to the Galaxy schema, which, as I explained, is my favorite data model because you can streamline Power BI building with it, and you can also do more machine learning things with it compared to the limitations that exist within a star schema. And there's really a couple of reasons why people struggle with this. The first is it's very at start, very, very advanced for most to understand. And the second is normally you'd have like an SSAS model. So it's if you're dealing with large amounts of data, and Power BI isn't really suitable for this, even ETL. And the easiest way I can explain very advanced for most to understand is with a date dimension table in the middle. So if you've got two fact tables and a common dimension table in the middle is a date table, even if those dimension fact tables aren't related by anything by date, if you take a field from the dimension table, you for date, you can view the metrics from the other two fact tables side by side. And in reality, it's a little bit more complicated, but that's the basic principle. And I think the reason why I can explain it in such a user-friendly way that you can't find online is because the data analysis skills are so strong. So, it makes sense. I'm always thinking, well, how do I get the business value from the data model? So 4.2, if we go on to that next, where I mentioned large amounts of data. I have managed to find a way around this for imported data, but it took me like 170 hours to do, and it was very, very advanced. I had to create my own methodology, well, two of them technically, but I wouldn't be surprised because unless you know your use cases beforehand, you wouldn't want to put the time investment up front to try and use it. So I suppose the next question is, does it get more advanced in the data modeling than you're explaining? And here's the thing, right? We've covered an advanced area of data modeling that I can't find online, and I think it's very informative, and I think everything is very practical that I'm saying. But you'll remember, because I can also compare it to interviews and stuff, but you'll remember at the start, very, very start of the presentation, I said, when I used to lead analytics training sessions, I tailored it to the level it was at. So if they could ask the right question, I could probably do it. And probably in all of my 170 sessions, I had to go nowhere near the upper limit, more like 25%. And actually, the data modeling that I've explained to you, I actually have a whole another level completely on top of this, where it's talking about dimension tables replacing using some DAX code, driving dynamic row-level security of dimension tables, building visuals that allow you to benchmark or compare results using galaxy schemas and stuff, and snapshotting, as well as a couple of other things where you're using compression algorithms to deal with large data like 120 columns, 3 or 4 million row, which normally you wouldn't be able to do in Power BI from an Excel output. So it's very much if this was like a paid formal training session, like I do on site with customers, you had a business requirement. That's when I mention things because I don't want to overload you with loads of use cases or give away tricks that I would use if I had to impress people in an interview. So I like to keep those separate. And the next question after would be, look, you really know your stuff about data modeling. Is that your strongest skill set? Why are you so good at it? And the answer is this isn't my strongest skill set. This is actually my normal skill set. And whether you're covering DAX, visualization, statistics, security, Excel versus Power BI or Tableau, the areas I'm equally as strong as them compared to my advanced data modeling, which actually isn't as advanced as I can do, but it's more advanced compared to what's out there today. So what I do have is a much stronger skill set than what I'm showing. And the stronger skill sets are the analytics. So if you said like, okay, Vita, show hundreds of thousands of pounds of profit, looking at patient pathways in the NHS or outlier for mortality indicators, can you sort it out for me, improve KPIs? Most times I've done this in the past, like pass over here, and most times I can do it there and then. Likewise, if it's for uptake for BI solutions, which is very common, a lot of people have dashboards, but no one really uses it. So it's the same as not having it built, and they don't really know how to show benefits via automation and self-serve. So in effect, this data modeling presentation, although I think it's very advanced and very, very useful, it's actually quite small compared to my other skill sets. And it was an easy topic. It related to the exam, so I fancied explaining it. And the reason why, the data modeling is so important to me is because I'm really, really strong on the front end and I almost need a stronger engine, which isn't the main reason why people do data modeling. But for me, it's I want to do more advanced, I want to show bigger benefits. I need a really strong data model that can handle these more advanced concepts. And with Power BI, it's just a tool. There's actually lots of other concepts like project management, like benefits realization, understanding how to do that. like your soft skills, how you come across, knowing how to do business value from the analytics, working out the KPI, and then translating that into a dashboard in a way the stakeholder hasn't asked you. That is also other skills that I understand, and it almost informs the big picture. So it's not very much a case of, I'm using Power BI, you need to know how to use the stacks. It's how does it map back to a business requirement? How do you show value from it? How can you do it more advanced? And although there's a few tools I'm very good at, these days I only specialize in Power BI. And as per this session, it's actually the training that I'm offering. And finally, you might be thinking, you really know your stuff. And it might be akin to seeing a really skilled football player on the pitch and he's doing those cool tricks, he's dribbling everyone, and part of you's thinking, you're into football, I wish I could do that. Well, I can't help you there. But if it's Power BI analytics at the organizational level where it counts, I know the clicks and how to problem solve, and I can train you on how to do those things. So the reason I created this presentation was actually just to showcase a small part of my skills, and I'm actually a Power BI Microsoft certified trainer if it's something you're after. In terms of what are the disadvantages to Power BI training at the moment and how I came up with the idea is the courses are always generic. When I looked online for them, they might teach you some DAX and data modeling, but if you're pulling the data from a SQL data source, some of the DAX won't work. Likewise, if you're pulling it from an SSAS data source, neither will the data modeling, so it's generic. And the other thing is, a lot of organizations and people, they separate out the sessions. So they'll do a Power BI desktop only, they'll do a DAX only, they'll do an advanced DAX, and there'll be 5 or 6 types. So they're really getting their money's worth. And I think it's fine if that's your full-time job and you don't have a lot of experience training because you wouldn't know how to do it all in one and you wouldn't have the incentive. And the impact of this is that it's really expensive if you want to upskill in Power BI, have your team at a certain level of proficiency. And I've looked online and most charge about 550 to 1,500, if not more, per person for an agenda. I very much feel you can teach yourself in 3 or 4 days using YouTube. And in most cases, the trainer has some experience training, but they probably aren't competitive to work on a higher band in Power BI development. So they're just sticking to the training and repeating it day in, day out, more or less the same. Very repeatable. And it's very rare you'll have a very good trainer and a very good developer because the developer doesn't always know how to explain the ideas concisely or rely on the training because they're problem solving. So what do I offer? Well, first of all, I'm going to tailor the session. So because I'm an actual developer and a trainer, if there's not a real-time requirement for data, maybe a different connection mode can be used that you're not aware of. For me, I would be aware of it, and I can problem solve around your requirements. And this is something I've actually done in previous roles. I had complex Tableau dashboards that I needed to work for self-serve. I didn't have months to wait for the SSIS to be done for the data warehouse. So I thought of a workaround and I got my dashboard live in days. And I'm always problem solving because I'm a bit of an expert in that, as well as the whole area DAX analytics, stakeholders uptake, teaching business problem solving, and tailoring it so you can get the biggest gain to your organizations. The other thing is I put notes in handouts. I do sheets, which I've created. And this is really to digest the more advanced concepts because I'm teaching how to solve business problems and then the steps are after. And the reason I do this is because I don't want to spend all day showing you clicks. So I'll show the principle, and if something is more advanced, rather than spend 2 or 3 hours on it, I'll be like, look, this is how it works. You've got the idea. Follow the handouts because in the handouts it will be step by step. And this is very much from the analytics trainer role. When I'm there, I've got mixed classes. I can answer something for 10 minutes, but if they only need a 2-minute answer, I'll give that. And then I'll say, if you want to read into it, here's the 10. If they want to talk for 20 minutes on the area, that's fine as well. So you're going to get everything combined and you're going to be getting a lot of value. And that's, I think, a lot of other people can't do in sessions because they don't have the experience. I'm also a lot cheaper than £500 per person per day. And as we mentioned, the prices are a lot more than that. But most importantly, with regard to the training skills in isolation, arguably, I think I'm more skilled and knowledgeable than any trainer in any organization, having almost 4 years leading 170 on-site tailored training sessions nationally in the analytics software. And I created all of the materials from scratch, over 40 manuals, 150 FAQs, video scripts, all of the harder stuff on a commercial level I came up with to show benefits using the tool and get uptake. And I've also done that in a variety of other organizations as well, using different tools such as Tableau and Power BI. So I excel at this. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer and I passed the Power BI exam with 92.7%. So the content I'm providing is actually Microsoft certified, and I have other qualifications such as Azure Enterprise, and I'm always upskilling, but I like to stick to my strongest skill set, hence it's only Power BI training, even though I know a few other tools. And I also can come up with the solutions to the business problems that, as I mentioned before, others wouldn't think about. And you can go as far advanced as you like with regards to products and self-serve. So I'm really the real deal when it comes to Power BI training. The other thing is, I've been thinking about this for 6 months prior to this PowerPoint, scoping the idea. So I already know how I'm going to get the business value out of you for your training sessions before I even get there. And it's very much, it's not going to be book a meeting and I'll turn up. I'll put what I think we need to cover over LinkedIn and ask some business questions ahead of the session. Then I think it'd be good to have a 30-minute session beforehand and scope it out. And I have another idea of how I'm going to quantify the benefit as well. So it'll be a very, very high level of standard. And I've even got ideas and material ready for the different sections. So 90% of it's done. I know how I'm going, and I know how I'm going to tweak it so it can be the most effective. And I also know how I'm going to measure the feedback so you can check that people did actually get value out of the session. So it's none of that make it up as you go along, fake it or make it. I'm very much business value and professionalism. And if you need Power BI training for your organization, I don't know what more you can ask for in terms of training experience, qualifications, or costs. But the really nice thing is, even if you're not after training, it doesn't matter because I have a few other things I'm quite talented at apart from Power BI training. And the Power BI training at the most will only be a couple of days a month if I'm free, as I have other things I like to keep up. I wouldn't like to do it as a full-time job, so I'm quite laid back and cool about stuff like that. But when it comes to business, I'm very, very turned on. And the idea came also because I used to enjoy training on site with customers and solving business problems in the past. Probably enjoy developing the solutions a bit more, but I thought if it's just a few days a month, it will be fine. And if you can find a stronger or a better deal in the market elsewhere, then that's fine with me. Ultimately, I'm not a director, I'm not a CEO, and I'm not a manager in a company that needs to show value using data or selling products. So there's no real pressure on me compared to everyone else who isn't sure how to do that. So if I don't get a booking, doesn't affect anything. But if I do, that's great. I'll pop along, sort out a business problem, and then see what comes next. So thank you for having a listen, and maybe I'll hear from you soon.